bit of a set change here, so I am waiting for that, and then I will bring my guests out. So I'm Terry Schultz. I'm a freelance journalist and devotee of Brussels Forum for almost as long as it's existed, covering the European Union and NATO. I'm very happy to be here. And welcome not only to those of you in the room, but those of us watching live right now as the sessions are being streamed. So I would actually put a question mark on the end of the title of my panel, A Wider Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe, question mark. We're going to talk a lot more about this in this panel. Is it? What does this actually mean for the countries that have just been granted candidate status? I'm very pleased that we are almost on the cusp of breaking news with this story, as it was just last week that Moldova and Ukraine were granted candidate status to the European Union, and Georgia was given what's called a European perspective, and we will talk more about what that means with my two guests, who I can now bring to the stage, hopefully. Nicu Popescu, getting through the traffic jam here, is the Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, also the Foreign Minister and Minister for European Integration, busy guy, and Katarina Maternova. She is the Deputy Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, also a very busy person here at DG NEAR. Thank you, Katarina. This looks a lot more like Crossfire than I expect this to be, but I will do my best to make it lively. Okay, guys, You may be seated. Thank you so much, Nico and Katarina. I can't imagine how you found time to be here, but we're very grateful. And just to everyone out there watching, of course, you can hashtag the juicy comments you're about to hear at hashtag Brussels Forum, capital B, capital F. So we now have only 21 minutes for this conversation, so I'm going to get right to it. And I've been wanting to talk to Nicu since this happened, since this very momentous event for your country last Thursday, being invited as a candidate to the European Union. But of course, Nicu, on the same day, we saw, or the day after, within 24 hours, countries who also had this status complaining, not happy with it. So what does this mean for Moldova? I mean, you've been working on this for so long.
Yes, that's fantastic news to begin with, and we've made it thanks to a lot of friends, and Katarina is definitely among them. And that's really, really something which gives us great hopes for the future. At the same time, that's also a recognition of our Europeanness. We have a European language, history, culture, society. We've been a democracy for 30 years. We've had, with a lot of difficulties, we have nonetheless a political system and an economic system that deserves to be a candidate country, just like the countries of the Balkans do. And that's what we've been saying throughout these months and even years before, that we as a country deserve to have the same chance that the countries of the Western Balkans, and you mentioned that some of them are still waiting, but at least one of them joined the EU. So, and here I, of course, talk about Croatia. And here we are strong believers in a merit-based accession process, where we have seen, not least in the Balkans, that if you do your homework, you do it well, you continue. It's not just the only thing that matters, but it does matter. So we're believers in a merit-based process. We don't want shortcuts. We want to go the hard way, the fair way, and we want to do the homework and one day to join the European Union. That's our plan. That's where we are with this.
But I mean, not to be mean, Nicu, and we're old friends, you know I wouldn't be mean to you, but if there were not a war in Ukraine, and if Ukraine's very emotional application and plea to the European Union to move this umbrella over it, would Moldova have gotten in at this time?
The history of European integration and war are very closely interlinked. If there would be no Second World War, there would be no European communities. If there would be no Balkans War, I'm not sure if the Thessaloniki summit in 2003 would have taken the,
So you're saying no shame in that?
No, I think the whole story and the whole history of European integration is a way for the states of Europe to try and address war-related matters and to look for the best ways to pacify the continent, to make it more prosperous. So in this sense, yes, there is a clear direct link to the war. But the whole history of the European Union is directly linked to these attempts to overcome the effects of wars. So that's quite clear to me. So, you know, to a certain degree, I mean, there's even not... That's a false question, right? Because that's precisely the type of historical moments when you take big decisions about the fate and the future of Europe. And this is what happened last week with the member states endorsing candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova and offering an EU accession perspective to these countries and Georgia. So that's a historic moment. And that's completely in line with previous historic moments. And of course, if we look at other enlargements, Spain, Portugal, Greece, they came as a response to the collapse of dictatorships in these countries. The accession of Sweden, Finland, Austria to the EU also came in light and after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. So this relationship between enlargement and big, sometimes tragic, but sometimes very positive moments in European history has always been there.
Okay, well, and there is clearly a difference between having a war on your territory and not having a war on your territory, so you will have the positive and less of the tragic, let's hope. But Katarina, is what's being offered a Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe? I think
to the defense of Nicu and his country, they don't have the kind of tragedy as Ukraine, but they shoulder a huge number of refugees, largest number of refugees in per capita in Europe, and really suffer from aggressive Russian use of supplies of gas, for example, as a weapon. So back to your question, is this an offer of a Marshall Plan? I think that to use the shorthand, and I realize we are in the 75th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, so it's a bit of a motto of this meeting. I think is appropriate in the case of Ukraine, where we are talking about a massive reconstruction effort that will have to come, and even be before that through the rehabilitation that is taking place on a daily basis of the bombed bridges and roads and railroads and power stations. I think for the broad region, I would like to say that we're not discussing it in the concrete sense of a Marshall Plan, not to make sure that there is no expectation of that, because I'm not saying there is not a need for investment. We actually have an economic investment plan for the region in the amount of 2.7 billion grants and guarantees over the next over the multi-annual programming period of the EU until 2027. So we are very much concentrating on investment, but the term Marshall Plan calls an image of a war-torn country which we are not dealing with either in Moldova or the case of all the rest of the Eastern Partnership. So I just wanted to take a little bit of an issue with the name, but that doesn't mean that the last week meeting is not really a historic one, because until last week, neither Moldova nor Ukraine nor Georgia had a European perspective. We actually quite meticulously made clear that this was not an ante-room Eastern Partnership to enlargement. And now there is this official recognition of that, which I think will really rejuvenate both the enlargement process itself. Therefore, I don't see I know that in the Western Balkans, some countries were disappointed. I actually think that this has a potential of rejuvenating and re-energizing the enlargement process. And I think it opens much deeper relations for the EU with important countries in the East.
But how realistic is it that getting candidate status means that within some limited number of years that can even be projected, you will become a member? I mean, the countries themselves may think that they've got their plan, but that's not always how it works out in Brussels. No. And in this vein, talk about Georgia. What is a European perspective versus the candidate status?
So, and I think, thanks for asking about Georgia, because it's important to explain. They have not been given candidate status, so they have been very explicitly told that they have a little bit of homework to do compared to where Moldova and Ukraine are right now. But all three have received European perspective. That means they moved into the anteroom of European enlargement. Now, are they going to be member states in a year? No. First, we need to start negotiations. Then there is quite some technical work to do, both on the fundamentals of reforms at home, rule of law, etc., as well as on the technical norms to be able to be part of the EU. But in all three countries, we are not starting from scratch. Unlike the countries where I come from, my country was part of the 2004 enlargement, after the end of the Cold War, by the way, too, to stress Nicu's point. We were starting the negotiations process from scratch. Here, since the accession, since the association agreements of 2014 and the deep and comprehensive free trade area, the free trade agreement with the EU, we have, with all three countries, been going through massive reforms, and they have been legislating and building institutions that comply with European norms and standards. In other words, the famous or infamous acquis communautaire of thousands of pages, they actually have been going through that. So it's hard to say exactly where they are on the continuum, but they are not starting from scratch. This is not going to be completely new. So I would believe that once there is the political will among the member states to really start the accession negotiations themselves, they can go in a relatively compressed time. But the political will obviously will be the most important one.
And Nicu, what do your citizens think is going to happen? What do Moldovans feel about this process? And is there any division? I mean, are there Moldovans who don't want to go in this direction? And then I would like I would be able to take a couple of questions from the audience, probably not much more than that, but raise your hands in just 1 second.
The aspiration to join the European Union has been there for almost since day one of Moldovan independence. Even just, the Foreign Ministry of Moldova is called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Integration since 2005, right? So it's been there for quite some time as an objective. There's a clear, firm, persistent desire from the Moldovan public to join the European Union. Now, this process has had its own ups and downs. You asked me about whether everyone is on board. I mean, in democratic societies, you always have people who have different views. And that's normal and that's natural. What matters is that, time and again, Moldovan elections have produced strong majorities in favor of joining the EU. And actually, in the last more than 15 years, all governments have pursued EU aspirations as their objectives. Now, some did it, in a way that did not necessarily brought us closer. But the dynamic is there, and this is proved on pretty much every single type of public policy. Katerina mentioned the DCFTA. Now, 2/3 of Moldovan exports go to the EU market.
That's amazing.
That's quite a lot. We've implemented large swaths of the acquis communautaire, and if you export to the EU, that means that your products comply with the acquis communautaire, because the acquis communautaire is already part of our legislation. For us, it's also easier because our language is Romanian, so we don't even need to translate it, and that makes some processes much faster. And of course, you have very strong societal links and geographic links. So there's a lot of hope now that we are heading towards a new phase of relations in our relations with the EU. At the same time, we're also being very realistic. The war is having a major negative impact on everyone in Europe, including on us. Of course, Ukraine is suffering the most, but Moldova is also affected economically. Of course, our insecurity levels have dramatically increased. That's affecting somewhat the economy. We have a high inflation rate, very high energy price increases, and all of that is...
In other words, you're completely European.
Well, I think if you look at the numbers, you're going to see that we're more European than... But we're not facing easy months and years ahead. And as we talk about that, we also have no clarity as to where this war ends, how it ends, when it ends, all of these uncertainties are there. It will be difficult, we're very realistic, it's not going to be quick, but that's the way to go. We have a strong mandate to do that, and that's the only way to ensure Moldova's democracy, peace, and Europeanness.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from each side of the room. Sir, you had your hand up first, and someone from over here, the lady in the front. Okay.
Good afternoon.
And we'll make everything a lightning round, because we have 8.5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Samir Beharic, the Balkan Forum, Bosnia and Herzegovina. As someone coming from the Western Balkans, it is hard to listen that there were countries who entered this process, candidate process, on a merit-based way. I will just remind you of Kosovo, who has been fulfilling all the benchmarks on visa liberalization process. Kosovars cannot travel visa-free throughout the EU. North Macedonia changed the name of the country, changed the constitution, couldn't move forward. Coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has its own Russian proxies in the country, I ask myself,
you have to ask a question, but ask them.
Do we need to enter a war in order to become a candidate country?
Oh, that's a tough question. Okay, and this question here? But please, very, very quickly. A mic?
We need a microphone.
Thank you. Eka Metreveli, Tbilisi-based think tank Rondelli Foundation. So from the morning we were listening to a very interesting discussion, and President Conley has mentioned that the war did not start on February 24, but in August 2008. And then Prime Minister also of Belgium mentioned that giving a candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova was a geopolitical decision. So my question is here that how should Georgian people understand the decision to be left out of trio, so that Georgia is not part of a geopolitical struggle against Russia?
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Okay, either one of you? I think they were actually directed more towards you,
yeah.
Katerina.
And I'll remind everybody I'm a civil servant, I'm not a politician. So ultimately, and this is part of the issue, obviously, all of these decisions are not made by the bureaucrats in the Commission, but the politicians in the European Council. So on the, for example, on the North Macedonia question, which I think very much have the same emotion as you were able to express, this is something that 3.5 years ago the Commission came with a proposal to start negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. And first one of the major countries was opposing it, then it's now Bulgaria. Hopefully there will be some momentum still this week that can reverse that. So yes, there is a credibility issue, and I think that's why I'm saying with the inclusion of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia in the European perspective, I very much believe that this will bring the energy necessary to restart the enlargement process, because the enlargement process with the Western Balkans has been a very drawn out affair, and the country as big as Ukraine forces the issue, will force the issue of any kind of changes in the decision-making process, the absorptive capacity of the EU itself, as well as it hopefully will create a little bit of competition and spur the countries to be trying to be faster in specific reforms, as we did before the 2004 enlargement. We were all looking at each other, there was peer pressure, and countries tried to outdo themselves. So I don't think you need a war.
Disheartening when the problem ends up being in Brussels. I mean, this is clearly, it's understandable, as you said.
And now on to the Georgia issue very quickly. And I said it also on Georgia radio. Georgia is not left out of the European perspective, because that's what is the most, between European perspective, getting European perspective and getting candidate status, the basis for candidate status is European perspective. And Georgia got that. I come from Slovakia. We started negotiating 2 years later than all of our members. All of the 2004 enlargement countries started negotiating in 1997, Slovakia in 1999. So, and then we caught up, and we actually, competed and outdid some of the others. So if Georgia finds the political will to address the issues that are fairly lengthily outlined in the Commission opinion, it can catch up because it's gotten so the geopolitical signal is the European perspective. And then it depends on what's happening internally in the country, is the candidate status and the negotiations, etc. Then it's merit-based. The basis, the geopolitical message, is the European perspective.
Okay, I'm going to take, I think we just have time for 2 more really short questions, really short answers.
Thank you, Ciprian Stănescu from Romania. So from Romania to Moldovan, bravo, foarte tare. So we're not sure when the war will end, but we do have one certainty, which is winter is coming. So it's not about Eastern neighborhood necessarily, but how do you look at the winter? What are you doing, and what do you need help with?
Good practical question.
It's going to be a very short question, but probably a longer answer. Kasia Pisarska, I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum. Prime Minister, if you could update us on the situation in Transnistria, what are your expectations there? Thanks.
Good question. Okay, Nicu, quick.
So winter is coming every year, and we've been preparing.
Breaking.
When it comes, of course, as I said, the biggest question is how this war ends, where it ends, and when it ends. And of course, in our assessment, we think the war could continue for quite some time, and that will continue affecting all of us. And we will be very insecure as well in autumn and in winter. And that will continue to affect everyone's food supply security, imports, exports, supply chains, everything. There's also the question of energy supplies in the case of Moldova, which is quite critical, and there's the issue of electricity and gas. On all of them, we've been making some steps to improve our energy security, and not just on our own, but with the support of our partners. So we've been working quite closely with the European Commission. There's also the Moldova support group launched in Berlin by France, Germany, and Romania. And on the 15th of July, we'll have a second conference in Bucharest, where we look at ways to improve Moldova's electricity and energy security of supply, and many other and dozens of other measures. There is some progress. We're preparing. The situation in terms of our resilience is already better than it was just 3-4 months ago. But of course, we have a long way to go, and as all the countries of the EU know, solutions aren't easy, quick, or cheap. So we're better than we were 3 months or 4 months ago, but in any case, we're also glad that we're de facto treated as an EU member state when it comes to the gas acquisitions platform and Repower Europe. So that also gives us reassurance that we're not on our own. We are part of it, just like any other country that is aligned with the EU, and then the solution will come through a joint effort. And again, here I must say that Katarina is our go-to person for all of these type of questions. And Transnistria
is such an
Before
important
we
question,
get to Transnistria, one sentence. One thing that happened, and I think it's extraordinarily important, and I'm not sure even it was discussed in the previous panel. This is during the war. In 1 month into the war, Ukraine and Moldova joined the European electricity grid, which is really a huge, both, again, a geopolitical signal, but also very practical one.
And happened under fire, incredible.
Yes,
really
and now Moldova is buying, there is a huge excess of electricity because of the small demand in Ukraine, so Moldova is in fact buying excess electricity from Ukraine. So
this is huge.
Sorry.
Transnistria. The Transnistrian region of Moldova, as you know, has been a major problem for our country for 30 years. There's an illegal Russian military presence there. Of course, that poses a problem to everyone. There have been some explosions. For the moment, the situation is calm. But of course, given the regional situation and the continued war in Ukraine and all of that is creating a sense of insecurity throughout the region. So I would say that for now the situation is calm. We don't know how it will.
A second front opened by the Russians from Transnistria? Do you think that's at all
Well, I think we've all had to significantly reassess what is realistic and what is not since the middle of February. So basically, as a government, we're obliged and obligated to be preparing for every single contingency, including around the eastern districts of the Republic of Moldova, the Transnistrian region. So we are preparing, we've been preparing on the full spectrum of threats. What will happen is hard to predict. Partly because we don't know how the war will evolve. At the same time, we also get very strong signals, and it's also quite obvious that the absolute majority of residents of that region don't want to live in a war zone. We have a constant dialogue and exchange with the de facto authorities in that region. There's another deputy prime minister in charge of reintegration, so he meets quite constantly with the de facto representatives of the region. We are doing our best on both sides of River Nistru to keep peace, because of course, as I said, no one wants to live in a war zone. That applies to the residents of the Transnistrian region. That does not exclude risky scenarios, but we are doing our best to make sure that the situation remains relatively calm and stable as it is now.
I'm extremely disappointed that we don't have more time, since we have two people right at the heart of this development. Nicu Popescu, Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, Katerina Maternova from DG NIR. I'm so privileged to have gotten to shepherd your conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone. And coming up next, from political climate to environment, climate action in uncertain times. And Fiona Harvey from The Guardian will come up and take my place. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us for this.